Welcome back to Air Quality Matters. We already have the tools and knowledge we need to make a difference to the quality of the air we breathe in our built environment. The conversations we have and how we share what we know is the key to our success. I'm Simon Jones, and coming up, a very special conversation with Kath Noakes, Henry Burridge, and Nathan Wood. Why? Well, other than they're three of my favourite people, it's World Ventilate Day on the 8th of November, and who better to talk about the day than the three founders themselves. World Ventilate Day aims to raise awareness of the importance of ventilation as a crucial part of enabling health and well-being of people. It also seeks to recognise and celebrate the ventilation and indoor air quality community as a whole. This year, the World Ventilate Day theme is Collaborate to Ventilate, to shout about everything that is great about ventilation and how we have worked together. Share our stories about how you have worked with others to develop new technologies, make real changes to ventilation for energy and health, provide guidance and information, support new evidence on the importance of ventilation, and champion the training and development of people who deliver clean air. Kath, Henry and Nathan are regulars on the podcast at this stage, friends and colleagues, but also incredible advocates for everything World Ventilate Day stands for. I'll share links to both their bios and previous episodes on the podcast in the show notes. Do check them out, they're well worth listening to. Don't forget to check out the sponsors in the show notes and at airqualitymatters.net. This is a conversation with Kath Noakes, Henry Burridge and Nathan Woods for World Ventilate Day. Well, welcome everybody. It's really good to see you all. We don't, as I was just saying, we don't get together as much as I think we should do. There was a period of time, wasn't there, actually, during COVID or just before it, that we saw quite a bit of each other, and then we all got rather busy. We don't see each other as much as we used to. We're coming up to World Ventilate Day, and that's why we're doing this special podcast on World Ventilate Day. But the question I had is, why World Ventilate Day? Why not World Air Quality Day? Perhaps, Henry, if we start there, it might seem unusual to people that we're talking about ventilation when there's so much focus on air quality.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, ventilation and indoor air quality are inherently linked, and the aim of ventilation is to support the provision of good indoor environments, including really good air quality. The reason we focused on ventilation is it's action driven. There's a lot of events around clean air, but that's quite a nuanced conversation in terms of having a focal point of a day within the year where we can focus messaging and outputs around it. Having it action based in terms of ventilation made a lot of sense to us.
I really like that, actually, and I hadn't thought of that angle. It's kind of the agency angle, isn't it? Often when we're talking about air quality, it's something that we feel is outside of our controlling in a lot of way, either that we don't control the spaces that we're in or we don't control the ambient air quality in some way. But if you want action, actually focusing in on a pillar that has an impact on air quality, whether you fully understand what that is or not, is a really good way of making a difference, which is, I guess, what this is all about.
Yeah, I mean, I like it because no one gets off the hook in the sense that there's agency at every level, right from, international and national governance, right down to, people managing their own homes. There is responsibility at multiple levels for ventilation of different spaces and in different means of guidance and action. So I think it is action focused, but it is all encompassing. It doesn't put all the responsibility on the little individuals, and it doesn't mean that we all feel disempowered because it's all in the hands of government.
Do you know, it's one of the conversations I have most regularly with public housing providers, social housing providers, is the fascinating thing about ventilation is it's omnipresent. There isn't a space we occupy that in theory shouldn't have ventilation. So it's a fascinating window into the systems of an organization and the systems of real estate, and whatever lens you're looking through, there isn't a corner of that organization that doesn't have some level of responsibility for ventilation. So it's quite a powerful focus in a lot of ways. It's both present in every space we occupy, and it's something we can actually do something about, even if it's at a small level.
I think the other important thing about ventilation, Simon, is that it's not just about air quality. Air quality is one piece around ventilation, but ventilation is also critically important for managing the thermal environment in your building, managing the humidity in your building, managing comfort, managing energy as well. And I think if we just focus on air quality, we miss some of that bigger picture that's necessary when we think about how do we solve problems in buildings.
So why did this come about then? Because, I mean, we're in a room of friends here. We assume that good ventilation should be a given. We know that practically that doesn't happen necessarily in every space. Why you three and World Ventilate Day? How did this start, and why?
I mean, maybe I can take that. I think it actually came about by a chance conversation as much as anything. So Henry and I ran, and with other colleagues, ran a research network called Future Urban Ventilation Network for a number of years. And I believe I had a chance conversation with a colleague at BISA who'd set up World Refrigeration Day. And I kind of went, we ought to have something equivalent for ventilation. And it just kind of started from there, because we went, oh, that's a good idea. And it snowballed, and we're now into our 4th year of it, I believe. So we kind of, it was one of those things that we realized it was missing and that nobody had ever sort of championed it. And yet we have days for many, many other things. I guess the three of us, plus some other colleagues from BISA who've now moved on to do other things, were the kind of people who really grabbed it and said, let's try and make this happen.
And I guess that's where you come in, Nathan, is that you were at the time chair of the indoor air quality group, I guess, were you at that point for BISA? That's your link here?
Yeah, definitely. And when the idea came about, I mean, it doesn't take much to get me excited about work and ventilation and air quality and everything else. I was just like, we've got to make this happen. How do we make it happen? What do we need? What don't we need? And it's just wrapping everything in my daily life, because I live ventilation. So I think knowing that we could open other people's eyes and other businesses that maybe not realise that what they do has an impact in some way on ventilation. And it's the way in which it sort of got that global appeal really quickly. The names that come forward without much hesitation was really, really welcoming. And it's just trying to make sure that momentum continues. We don't want this just to be sort of, it's off the back of COVID. People are talking about ventilation and air quality. We want to make sure that it's the longevity going forward. And it doesn't seem to be a day that goes past where people aren't talking about air quality, be that through ventilation systems, domestic settings, commercial settings. There's new standards coming through all the time, new laws being introduced that support what we're doing. It's just a way in which we can maintain this momentum.
And I remember, one of the sentiments I remember from you, Kath, back during the pandemic was, and I think you probably said this on the podcast we had way back, like a year or 2 years ago, it was around the question that the pandemic asked us was, well, one of the questions it asked us was, what do we know about the ventilation in our buildings? Where are we starting from to manage this risk? And the answer was resoundingly, we haven't got a effing clue. And I imagine that void, that lack of awareness, was probably one of the sparks, I guess, for World Ventilate Day, was that, hang on a minute, like most spaces, this is not something that's considered or understood or we don't have any level of expectation of effectiveness. It was a big black hole for a lot of buildings, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, the pandemic was a huge trigger in a sense for this, because I think it's the first time, awareness of air quality has been growing for a number of years, but I think the pandemic was the first time that ventilation became something mainstream for the public. It was something everybody was being asked to do. And, it's the first time I've seen that much sort of media coverage, that much government focus, etc. on it. But you're right. I remember being asked by government officials, how well are our buildings ventilated? And the answer is, we just do not know. We know lots are poorly ventilated. And when you start digging, you find some great examples of really good stuff, but you find a heck of a lot of examples of inadequate ventilation, or just where it's ignored. We have a vast number of naturally ventilated buildings, and people just don't think about it. They just leave the windows shut. They are not aware. And I think the pandemic gave us a real reason for why ventilation mattered. But of course, ventilation goes well beyond just COVID transmission. It's something that matters to all aspects of our health and well-being.
Yeah, isn't it funny when you have these conversations with people that certain sentiments and framings stick with you, and that was one of the ones from our conversations over the years of the pandemic, was just that trying to understand the spaces we're in. One of the other ones, ironically, Henry, was one of yours, and I've used this very frequently, was this idea and framing of yours that when we think about ambient air quality, we look out the window, we see that as one space, that in some ways it's simple for our minds to conceive that out there is air quality. But out that same window, particularly in an urban setting, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of little boxes, each with their own dynamic of what's happening in that space, both from an air quality perspective and from a ventilation perspective. So it's an incredibly complex picture for most people that look out their window. What we're talking about is, as we said at the beginning of this, omnipresent. It's everywhere. Ventilation is everywhere, and it's different in every space. And so this is a big thing for us to wrap our heads around, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's where World Ventilate Day is so important, because we know from all sorts of examples, complex situations often lead to messaging that is ineffective and negative outcomes. And so World Ventilate Day offers the opportunity to come together as a community and think carefully about how we engage with the public and governance at all levels, so that we really try and keep people interested in their indoor environments. And, as Kath said, that has huge benefits for, energy and well-being and productivity, and a lot of that is linked to air quality as well.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And also I think what that does is it breaks down the barriers that exist in engineering because of social and economic differences and different regions and different environments. When we start talking about the messaging and what people can do about spaces, that makes it a global conversation. I just had Chandra Sarkar on from Singapore University talking about how they manage ventilation in hot and humid climates. And one of the things they've seen there that's made a huge difference is giving people the agency and control to manage their spaces. There's this creep of technology and expectation that we think with automation, we narrow the band of our expectations of comfort and interaction with the space. We just assume that it's going to do what it's supposed to do. When you take that away, what they've found when they take that away from people in hot and humid climates and require them to turn fans on and open windows and interact with their building, and for ventilation to be present in front of mind, they're getting better air quality outcomes, and people are expressing better satisfaction because they now got this agency. They have some control in their outcomes. And I think that's what's really fascinating about the air quality ventilation dynamic, is that It's very hard for us to control the air quality that we breathe. We have, as you said over and over, Nathan, we have to take a breath. It's something we don't have a choice over, but we do have a choice of whether we open a window or not, or turn a fan on or not, or replace a filter or not. These are things that are in our control.
Let me come in on that, Simon. It's so frustrating. It mustn't just be me. When you're in a building, like for a meeting, and you instantly have that sense that the air's stale. You don't need a monitor on the wall or anything. Or there might be a monitor on the wall and it's blinking like red, or there's a sad face or something. And you're itching to sort of take control of the environment. But a lot of spaces that we go into, you haven't got that control. You're under somebody else's BMS control that says we need this temperature at this time in the morning and we turn everything off at night, hopefully. But I think there's that change in narrative whereby in your own home, you have that control. And I think through the messaging on World Ventilate Day, it enables people to think a little bit more about that, because we've got support across the globe, but also from schools, individuals, businesses, people that are in no way connected to ventilation or air quality are actually thinking about it. So I think knowing the frustrations and the anxiousness that I get when I go into spaces, or me and Kath share pictures of grills on trains and stuff, it's, not everybody goes into a space and looks up like most of us do. But I think it might just, if we can turn a few heads to start and pay a bit more attention and to actually think about, well, hang on, I am in this office. It is stuffy here. And when I leave, I do have a headache, or when I'm at home, it's just about those little conditions and how it impacts you. But I think, I'm a huge advocate for air quality monitoring and devices and smart tech, but I think the practicalities of sometimes maybe opening the window, and Kath's educated me about the terminology and framing with fresh air, which I had a real problem with early on. But you need to understand your audience sometimes, and the terminology that you use has to reflect that. So
yeah, and well, I've got a new tagline for next year is "Don't look up" for World Ventilate Day.
Can I come in there though? Because I think actually that leads really nicely into the theme for this year, which is collaborate to ventilate. Because so often ventilation is seen as an engineering problem, and it's therefore the responsibility of the engineers, or it's something we can't do anything about because the way we've set it up is all about it's being, as Nathan mentioned, it's under the control of the building management system and nobody can do anything with it. And yet actually to get it right, we need that collaboration across. We need the engineering and the human side of things, of buildings, to work properly together. And that means both a change in how you use systems, so technologies and things, but it's a mindset change, because it's a mindset change amongst the engineers who provide ventilation systems in buildings, to understand that people are the users and people need to know how to use them and need to be able to engage with those systems effectively. But it's also then a change for the people who use those buildings to understand the relevance and importance of it. And I think to try and bring different aspects together a bit more, and to, rather than it's the responsibility of an engineer, therefore I don't have to think about it. It's that collaborative piece. And I think there's a huge opportunity. It's a big long-term opportunity, but, how do we train our engineers? Do we actually talk about health with them? We talk about sustainability now, but health is a massive part of this. How do we train our health professionals? We talk about all the things to do with diseases and things, but do we actually talk about how you deliver good buildings? And then with the public, you probably need a bit of both in there, and an understanding across different aspects. So I think there's some really real good opportunities in this whole collaboration space.
I guess a lot of what Kath says there resonates really well with you, Henry. I mean, you've been at the coalface of that with things like SAMI and the work you did with schools, where you've genuinely been looking at that full spectrum of interaction in a space, how users perceive air quality and ventilation, how the people that provide those spaces see it, and the outcomes.
It's only been in the last sort of good number of years that I've really appreciated just how important engaging with people who really understand human behaviours and how to engage, society at large. engineers, we're very skilled at doing a lot of things, but not necessarily those sorts of things. And I think somehow tying this, deep, complex knowledge into and looking at it through the lens of how humans want to behave and how you can and cannot change their behaviors, particularly in their own homes or spaces where they have the agency, is really important.
Yeah. And I made a note here. Henry says engineers don't have soft skills. That's a good one for a video short, I think.
I did not say that.
but another thing I made a note of, and talking of framings that I remember, and this I think is one of the things that I take from World Ventilate is also pride in an industry as well, that ventilation is important. You should be proud to be involved in it. And a lot of what these days are about shouting from the rooftop, I care about ventilation, and that's what I do for a job. And it's one of the things I always remember you saying, Nathan, if you're in an office and you see people coming in, engineers coming in to check the fire systems, people will come in during the workday. They're proud to do what they do. They do something that's a life safety system, you hope, and people don't mind being disrupted for 5 or 10 minutes while somebody's going around making sure that you're protected and you're safe. When did you ever see a ventilation person coming around proud in the middle of the day, putting a ladder up and checking the flow rates of the air that's being delivered to the people in the office space? There's an element here of this stuff's important, and we should be noticed for what we do as an industry.
Totally. And it was only, we've been in business 23 years, and it was only the last 10, 11 years that we really made the connection here. But it was only through seeing what was happening overseas. I mean, HVAC in the States, for example, is huge. There's organisations and businesses and individuals that make more money through showcasing on TikTok than they do their actual core business, which is, I'd love to see that here. But it's the way in which we escape up onto a roof, or we're in a cupboard and we're tinkering with this shiny box. But what we do as ventilation engineers has a direct impact on people's health every second that they're in that building. So whilst it's not seen as a managed service, or as I was just writing down, a safety critical aspect of a building, and there's real terminology we should try and hammer home for ventilation, it's the way that, if there's a gas explosion or a gas leak, chances are it'd be quite a massive issue. Or if somebody gets an electric shock, it's pretty instant. What we do, I forget the terminology, we are the physicians of buildings. What we do have more of an impact on people's health than their own doctor. And yet we're massively, I wouldn't say overlooked, just unknown of. Because even when I say to people, I'm a ventilation company, they go, oh, aircon. I go, no. We do a little bit of aircon, but, air movement within a space and air quality and everything around it. And then they glaze over and move on to something else. But it's just about banging that drum for anybody and everybody within this space.
Yeah. I've been using this. I've been using the ventilation analogy quite a lot recently to talk about why this stuff's so important. And one of the kind of mind games that I've been playing with people is to get them to imagine that every building has an incredibly efficient ventilation system that has a brilliant filter in it, and it captures all of the pollutants 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The only difference is you don't remove that filter. It pipes all those pollutants into the water system. And you drink. So everything you drink, everything you bathe in, everything you wash your clothes in, everything you wash your kids in has those pollutants in it. And that's just the way buildings work. You don't have a choice. You'd be outraged. And the only thing you could do would be to remove those pollutants from the air. It's just the way buildings work. And what people don't recognize is our lungs are that ventilation system. They're incredibly efficient delivery systems for pollutants into the body, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every building that you're in. And the only thing you can do to stop that happening, that's just the way it is. It's the way the body is designed and works. the only thing you can do is remove pollutants from those spaces. That's it. Like, that's the only lever you have. And how do we do that in buildings outside of source control and removing the risks that present those in a building? Is we do that through engineering solutions like ventilation. That's how important this is. So we need people to be coming into an office space, into the school, into buildings, and checking and servicing with pride these spaces. Because the great thing is that when we fix this stuff, the only thing the people of those spaces have to do is breathe to receive the benefits. So it's a very passive reception of the benefit of when you can't say that very often in health. That if all I had to do to lose a bit of weight was just eat food, and somebody else took care of the calories, my life would be a lot easier. But with air quality, if all I have to do is breathe in a space to receive the benefits of what somebody else has done. I don't even have to think about it. That's how important this stuff is. I'll get you back to the podcast in just a moment. I'd just like to take a minute to tell you about Zehnder, one of our partners. Zehnder is one of those companies that, if you're working in indoor air, you've probably come across. They really cover the full spectrum when it comes to ventilation, from simple mechanical extract right through to full climate systems where fresh air is enriched with heating and cooling. They offer the ventilation units, and they also offer everything around it: air distribution components, smart controls, the expert advice to make sure systems actually work as designed. One of the things I really like about Zehnder is their focus on knowledge through their experience centres and the Zehnder Academy. They help professionals keep pace with this fast-changing world of indoor climate. Whether it's tackling overheating, improving indoor air in tight retrofits, or simply making sure your filters are doing their job, Zehnder brings experience, depth of knowledge, and clarity to the conversation around healthy buildings. So if you're involved in building design, housing, or indoor environmental quality, they're really worth checking out. Details are in the links in the show notes at airqualitymatters.net, of course, and at Zehnder, that's ZEHNDER group.com. Now, back to the podcast. What do you think is next for World Ventilate Day? What we've got it coming up on November the 8th. We have some events. People can go to the World Ventilate website, can't they, to see what it's about. I know there's an event in London, Nathan, I think. Am I right?
Yeah, there's a few. It's great the support that we do get, and we have quite a barrage of people coming through asking about the theme, and the theme was a little bit late coming out this year because of the changes going on behind the scenes. But there's some Visa's doing some events, and Henry's got some teams, and Kath's been prolific trying to get different universities involved as well. There's a really helpful toolbox where you can download banners and bits and pieces on there to promote what's going on, but also get everybody's names listed down, the organisations that put their support behind it, because it should be a platform for businesses, ventilation companies, individuals, universities. I mean, the industry's been talking about collaboration across all different sectors for I don't know how long, and we are starting to see it. So going forward, I think it's going to be a place where we can actually sort of funnel in that information, so it becomes that sort of one of many places you can go to for sources of information on what's going on.
I feel like we've World Ventilate Day is really at a tipping point. The three of us, I think we're accepting that, what started as a conversation between a couple of individuals who happened to be in the United Kingdom, it has escalated to the point where, particularly last year, we saw, lots of things going on all across the globe. And so the three of us have decided that we need a more formal structure to enable us to increase the impact of the event for people and the community, we've got commitment from international experts and relevant associations and institutions around the world to form a steering committee to really help guide World Ventilate Day. But we're also here to really listen to what the community feel World Ventilate Day can do for them. Ventilation companies around the world are trying to, put in the systems to better manage indoor environments. And so this day can be a real opportunity for all of the different actors in this, right from, research through to corporations, through to associations and institutions and governments that give guidance, etc. And so I think we'll be in a really interesting position in the coming months to think about what World Ventilate Day looks like in the future. And we're really excited to hear from anybody who has, a desire to see things evolve in the future.
So I take it people can get in touch with you then, leading up to and following World Ventilate Day, to give ideas and to talk about their perspectives from their regions and their sectors, and that's all very welcome.
Oh no, definitely, yes. I mean, get in contact via the website or social media, obviously. But we've formed a committee that we think has quite balanced opinions, both globally and in terms of backgrounds. And so, we're excited to be increasingly guided by them, but we also want to hear from, particularly, individual companies and the like who could see the benefits of World Ventilate Day for what everybody in this space is really trying to achieve.
Yeah. And, I can speak from personal experience. I'm very fortunate to speak to people from all over the world about ventilation and air quality, and people's experiences and perspectives are incredibly different across regions, and everybody's got a unique perspective to bring to this conversation, and I think we're always the richer for understanding those different perspectives, and I think we can learn a lot as well. People in developing countries are having to work with often less tools, but have found really interesting and innovative ways to drive habit and culture change and outcome driven stuff without a lot of means, that we can learn an awful lot from in sectors here where we're struggling for resources to do exactly the same thing, and vice versa. We can learn a lot from the glass-clad Deloitte headquartered type buildings that are achieving platinum well standards about the art of the possible and the trickle down from those technologies and those approaches. There's a lot of cross-pollination potential in this space to do ventilation better. A question I wanted to ask each of you, and I didn't prime you for this, so apologies, but I think people would appreciate the gravity of experience on this call and the range of experiences all three of you have got. I'll start with you, Henry. What are we not talking about when it comes to ventilation and air quality at the moment that we should be? Whether that's from a perspective of the work you're doing with schools, whether that's some of the other work you're doing through this lens of World Ventilate Day, what should we be concentrating on and talking about at the moment?
I think we don't talk enough about the destructive power of apathy. I think I've been quite shocked, I suppose, how quickly people have become apathetic about their indoor environments, post the pandemic. We went from, making extraordinary measures where, kids were sitting in classrooms in coats because, they were forced to have windows open in really cold conditions, to, accepting that people can be apathetic about their indoor environment, particularly the air quality in it. And I think we somehow need to change the mindset to make people believe that that's not okay. And it's not okay because it's affecting their health, their well-being, their productivity, all the things that, we all care about, for ourselves and for those around us. And we somehow need to switch it that people feel more responsibility for checking their environment and being agents for good change whenever they can be.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I was talking to Bronwyn and Georgia, the organisers of the UN event, and I was asking them why at the top of the list they had air quality as a human right, and they were saying that for similar reasons, that at the core of this, we need to raise up the expectation that this is a fairness thing, that it's unfair that I should be in a space that's affecting my health. It's unfair that I'm from a group that's more vulnerable than another, and I'm being unfairly exposed to something. But by putting it as a right, you bring fairness into it. And I think fairness, and because it enables you, empowers individuals to say that this is not fair on me. I shouldn't have to sit in a classroom with a coat to get good air quality. That's not right. It needs fixing. How do we fix that? With ventilation. It's not right that I have to go into an office and I'm from a vulnerable group and I'm unfairly exposed to infection risk. And try and drive out that apathy. I think that's a really important point. And that brings agency back into the thing. First, to circle full back, it means that people are more likely to, and it's something I've been communicating a lot more heavily recently. Like some of this stuff, actually, we need to take responsibility for as individuals ourselves. We don't ask the tough questions of the spaces that we occupy. We don't think to do it, and partly that's on us. But you can't expect a supply chain to react if it's not asked. If you don't ask, you don't get, frankly. So are teachers asking the questions? Are users of offices asking the right questions? When was the last time the ventilation in this office was serviced? It's rubbish in here. We deserve better. What about you, Kath? What are we not talking about that we should be, do you think, at the minute?
So I'm gonna go a bit more technical and talk about complexity, because I think the pandemic gave a massive focus on ventilation and really got people thinking about it. But a lot of that was done in a very simple way. There were a lot of, if you work in my space, we talk about risk models and things. There were a lot of well-mixed rooms out there. And there's sort of created a perception that if you open a window, you've got a well-mixed room and that's it, you've ventilated. And actually anybody who works in ventilation knows this is not true. We got a massive growth in the use of CO2 monitors, and CO2 monitors are a fantastic tool. They're amazing. They can really show you something, but they're not infallible. They are an indicator. And you can measure something in a space and then you can measure a different bit of that space and get a different number. We should, there is a risk we get very hung up on exact numbers and treating things as if it's very easy. And actually real world ventilation fluctuates. It's complicated. It changes all the time. And I think there's a real interesting balance between understanding that complexity and making sure that we factor all of that in, and the human behaviour elements of that complexity in it as well. with giving straightforward messages. Because I think if you just, a straightforward message of, oh, you've got a CO2 meter, it's 900 parts per million, oh, look, everything's safe. It's not quite true. But at the same time, you need to balance that sort of simple idea with how you've got enough knowledge, particularly amongst the industry and particularly amongst those who are actually delivering systems, to recognise the challenges and the complexities of real world. Because I mean, perhaps just go back to your analogy, Simon, around water and drinking water and things, and piping all that air into drinking water. And people do talk about drinking water analogies quite often. And drinking water is to some extent easier because it's a single point source when it comes out your tap. So if you treat something happening in that pipe, you treat everything that comes out that tap. But air's a little bit trickier because it's everywhere. And it can come in the room clean, but then it can pick up a contaminant in the room. Recognizing that challenge, that air's really complicated, and it wants to go the path of least resistance, and it does all sorts of things that even when you work in this as an expert, you go, what's it doing? But how we balance that, and I think really helping those who deliver understand complexity and how we put that properly into the messages that we give out around it is. It's hard, but I do think we need to talk about it.
And then honestly, that's why I think days like World Ventilate Day are so powerful, because they are one of the levers that we have that is quite simple. I mean, ventilation fundamentally is moving air around. I mean, we could get onto air cleaning and, additive systems and all of that it is complicated, obviously, but fundamentally what we're talking about in World Ventilate Day is the dilution of pollutants in the air through the movement of air in a box, right? And that happens through fluid dynamics and engineering, and it's quite simple. Actually, the levers that are available to people are the things that people can do to improve their space. Are actually pretty straightforward, and so we dial all that complexity down into as we said at the very beginning of this call, into an action that somebody can take. Yes, I've got a bathroom fan, but is it actually moving any air? Is it actually doing what it's supposed to do? Yes, there's a thing on my window, but is it actually clear? Does any air come in it? Is there an undercut under my door? Can air move through this space into another space? These things are, at a practical level, often quite simple.
I agree. I think we need to understand both that complex side and the simple side, and how you get the right design to give you that simple solution.
And if we've learned anything from the sustainability journey, you need kind of red teams involved in those communications to be able to say, what are the unintended consequences of those messages? Are there things you're saying here that can be interpreted poorly or used against you later on? Because, in simplification of complex science, you have to make judgment calls on not the truth, but how you say something, so that it's understandable, that doesn't necessarily capture all of the complexity and the nuance. And we've learned from sustainability that can haunt you for a very long time, because in that, it's like doubt is our product and all of that kind of stuff. Like this stuff is complex. We do need to communicate it effectively. Nathan, what about you? I imagine there's all sorts of things on I imagine you've got a list of about 20 things there that we're not talking about that we should at the minute.
No, they've said it perfectly. Thanks for letting me go last. I've got time to think. For me, it's the competence around the people undertaking work in buildings or homes. It's just, we've not mentioned Awab's law that came into force on Monday. And with my business hat on, there's a lot of untrained people, well-meaning people, thinking that they're doing the right things and actually making situations worse where they haven't got the foundation knowledge of how they tweak things and how they move things and how they make changes to ventilation systems. The changes that they normally make most of the time are around noise. That fan's too noisy, we'll turn it down, and then the impact of that going on. So the competence and compliance, and never before have we been under the scrutiny in the UK specifically with the Building Safety Act, the Golden Thread of Information, and proving your competence and compliance to carry out work. But currently there is no true route to competence, specifically for domestic ventilation. There are some qualifications for commercial, but even the commercial qualifications are more around heating coils or systems in hospital care, healthcare. So there are changes coming. There are some good people doing some good things about it, and maybe we should promote them. And if they want to get involved, get in touch. It's the competence of people, because it is a skill set in its own right. And I will say that because we're a ventilation company, but it's multi-skilled trades having to go heroes, even if they're meaning good. You wouldn't let, bring it down. You wouldn't let, your nail technician, extract a tooth because they've got a set of pliers in the drawer. It's just, and we see it time and time again. And I post about this a lot on LinkedIn, the old tissue test, or we see, again, on social media, we picked up on a day in the life of a council electrician who was changing a fan. And I watched it, and it was a female engineer, and it's like, great, we're seeing change. And she changed the fan, and I was like, that's an air brick, a clay air brick it's going to on the outside without a ducted sleeve. And it's just, they think they've done a really good job, and they haven't. So it's those unintended consequences of trying to do something right and you can't. But in today's world, it's so important that you're able to evidence your competence in what you're doing and the compliance that you need to follow. So as Kath said, we've got some complex issues out there. Henry was saying about the human health aspect to it. So it's important that we enshrine all of that into the competency of the people undertaking the work. So we need multiple people involved, from healthcare to energy, sustainability, retrofit, domestic, commercial, industrial. It all comes into play, which is why I think World Ventilate Day is so important to try and tie all those people together.
There's quite shocking cases that have come out in the past week or so around insulation of buildings. And it's some ridiculous number, like 98% of the installations done under the last government scheme are wrong, are poor, and have led to worse environments for people, have led to mould and damp in those spaces. And that tells you a huge amount about competence. I mean, that's insulation rather than ventilation. But if you have a scheme where 98% is incompetent, that's shocking. And we really need to make sure that doesn't happen in the ventilation sector. We know there are cases where it has happened. MVHR installations have been, there's been some really terrible ones. And I know, Nathan, you see poor installations all the time for everything. But I would totally agree with you that competence is something really significant, and not just competence, but responsibility. Because if you install something and deliver something, you can't just walk away and put your hands up and pretend you never saw it, which is what happens. People do that, and companies go bust, and there's no comeback. And actually making sure we've got the right systems in place for comeback is going to be critical.
I was thinking exactly the same as Nathan spoke, because I was really shocked. I mean, to me, how simple is it to add insulation to a wall? It's relatively simple, and yet we, as a society, have somehow, found a way to get that wrong. Actually, I know, we've talked about whether ventilation is simple or complex. Compared to insulating a wall, it's really complicated, and there's a lot that can go wrong. And so I think, Nathan, is absolutely right to bring up this competency issue. And I think you're right, Kath, that does need to be seen through to accountability, definitely.
Yeah. To add my penny's worth in when it comes to what we're not talking about, and I think it pulls perhaps the three things together a little bit, is we need to reframe the conversation of ventilation around performance and outcomes, not the application of a product or a system. The measure of success for the vast majority of the built environment is, does a thing exist? Yes, therefore we've got what we paid for. We replaced the fan, the electrician wired it up, job done. We've got an air conditioning unit in a school classroom. We've got ventilation somehow. We've got an office. There's a grill on a ceiling. This room's ventilated. I don't understand why it's stuffy. People are just complaining. We assume that because a thing exists, that we've got what we paid for. And we need to somehow reframe the entire narrative around ventilation. That ventilation is not the product, it's the outcome of the air that it moves. And start to generate a language for normal people to start asking a different question of the people that manage their spaces. Not when was the last time that was service, is where's the paperwork to say what it's doing? And who's responsible for that and accountable for that? Because that's what ventilation is, not there to be on the wall and make a small humming noise. That's not its job. But when you look actually at the measure of success in the entire sector, in the vast majority of the cases, that's how we qualify it. The thing was there. It was replaced in its maintenance schedule. It makes a noise when I turn the light on. All of these things are a measure of its existence rather than its performance. And I think if we can reframe that, it empowers people to start asking the right questions. And it's a very important, you're right, Nathan, to come back. This is an important week for the UK. Arab's Law is a seminal moment for a very, very large proportion of the UK housing sector. This will apply to the private rented sector as well at some point. So, more and more is going to come under the auspices of the housing regulator and the housing ombudsman. This is the start of something, particularly for the UK. And I think your fear, as with many others, is that there's a lot of sticking plasters being used to solve a symptom rather than the cause of a problem at the moment. And we'll see how that plays out. But I think World Ventilate Day couldn't come at a better time to remind people that one of the pillars of Arab's Law is adequate ventilation in homes. If I think we can frame that in a way of, it's not just they replaced the bathroom fan with another bathroom fan, that somebody's actually made an engineering decision to deliver a certain amount of air to a space that's appropriate, that kind of framing would be really important. Well, I think that's a really good overall picture of both what World Ventilate Day is and why this stuff's important. I think that's been a really nice rounded conversation from three of you. Thank you. So if I could just perhaps come back to you, Kath, at the end, remind people what the World Ventilate Day is, when it is, and what they can do.
So World Ventilate Day happens every year on the 8th of November, and it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to promote the importance of ventilation, to celebrate the people who work in that field, to be able to highlight where there are great technologies, where there's new knowledge and evidence, to be able to show actions that we can do and where we've had successes, and to do that for everybody ventilation is there for everybody. So for the public, for policy, for industry, for research, World Ventilate Day is there for everybody. So we'd love people to get involved. And, yes, you can go to an event, you can run an event, but also you can just do stuff on social media and share all of your highlights and successes.
That's brilliant. Nathan, Henry, Kath, great to catch up with you. It feels like a kind of a morning coffee session, catching up over breakfast kind of chat. It's been brilliant. I enjoy. We must do this anyway more regularly, I think. I really appreciate your time today. World Ventilate Day, 8th of November. We'll share all the links and links to the website and so on in the show notes and on the website and so on, so people can check it out. And obviously we'll have Nathan, Kath's and Henry's contact details there, so you can bother them personally through LinkedIn. So thanks a million, guys. Really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Before you go, can I ask a favour? Before you shoot off to whatever it is you have to do next, or even the next podcast, if you enjoyed what we've been talking about here, please do spread the word and let's keep building this community. And don't forget to check out our sponsors in the show notes. Ultra Protect, Eurovent, Erico, ACO, Farmwood and Zender, all amazing companies, and without them, this podcast would just simply not be possible. Check them out in the show notes at airqualitymatters.net, and do check out our YouTube channel. All this content is there, plus much more. See you again next week.